We're here with the Honourable Michael Chertoff, and I will dive straight into the first question. Given your experience as Secretary of Homeland Security, how do you think the death of Osama bin Laden is going to change the perception of the Homeland Security of the American people? And do you think it will lead to any significant policy shifts?
I don't see it leading to a major policy shift in Homeland Security. The first question will be who succeeds bin Laden as a leader. There are a set of younger leaders who are very experienced and dangerous, and depending on how the new hierarchy establishes itself, that may require Americans to take another look at the tactics that terrorism might use, and then to make adjustments in terms of our own Homeland Security. But I think that's going to become evident over a period of time.
Further, how do you think it is going to change the approach of Obama's administration with Islamic countries and the protests taking place there, especially considering the coming of the new elections in 2012? Will there still be space for soft power methods?
I think that the elimination of bin Laden will not change the desire to have soft power as well as hard power, because I think they're both part of an overall strategy. What's actually been interesting, at least to me, is that the demonstrations over bin Laden being killed have actually been non-existent, or close to non-existent. The Pakistanis obviously have been, to some extent, upset about the fact that they view this as an intrusion into their sovereignty. But I think, realistically, it's understandable why the United States went in and did what we needed to do with bin Laden. So I think that the strategy will probably not be overhaul. Where you may see some change is in the debate about Afghanistan and what our continued role in Afghanistan will be.
Okay, thank you. What, in your opinion, is the main difference between the foreign policies of Bush and Obama's administrations, as you've had the opportunity to work with both presidents?
Well, if I restrict it to security policy, I would say there's not much difference. I mean that as a compliment. But, there's been some differences in presentation and tone, but I think the major elements of the strategy that the Bush administration had are really present in the current administration, and that shouldn't be surprising because American politicians, whether they're Republicans or Democrats, are still basically focused on protecting the country, and therefore it's generally been the practice in the United States to have leaders of both parties largely take a similar approach to security problems.
This is quite a long question. Obama started his mandate by announcing the use of soft power as the main instrument in order to solve disputes between the US and their adversaries or non-democratic countries. However, as we have seen, we could argue that he has used a mix of both hard and soft powers. Knowing what hard power is, knowing that hard power is the historically accepted norm in preserving the security of the homeland in the presence of a real and concrete threat, do you think it would ever be possible to use only soft power to solve US disputes?
No, I think that unless the world and human nature changes dramatically, I think that it'll always be a combination of hard power and soft power. That you obviously want to affect a large number of people by persuasion and example. There are times when there's no substitute for force. And I think that that's, again, whether it was President Bush or President Obama, I think they both demonstrated they recognize that both elements of power and the spectrum of power between both extremes are all tools that have to be used to protect the United States.
We remember that during the Cold War decades, American music, art and culture were successful instruments of cultural diplomacy. After the last 2 decades, do you think it can still influence the foreign policy of the US in terms of attracting the interest and the passion of citizens of potential enemy countries?
I think the answer to that is yes, but I also think that if you look at some of what the ideologues of extremism have said, sometimes American culture or Western culture as a negative. It's viewed as actually inspiring contempt or hatred for the U.S. For example, when it comes to areas involving, maybe more permissiveness in what you see on television or in fashion or things of that sort, that's actually been part of the narrative that religious extremists have used against the United States to say that's a sign of decadence and it's an offense against the religion. Great example is the number of plots that there have been, terrorist plots to kill cartoonists because they had cartoons that were viewed as disrespectful. So, even culture is a two-edged sword. It can be attractive, but it can also motivate people to have a negative attitude.
Yeah, okay.
Speak a little louder.
Of course. Following recent events, we are facing a new diaspora of people coming from North Africa, especially Libya and Tunisia to Italy and Europe, and the difficulties that EU countries are experiencing in finding a solution. French President Sarkozy said that we shouldn't give them political asylum as they are not escaping from a real war. What's your opinion on this?
Well, the issue of mass migration is probably one of the two or three most significant and most under-discussed challenges around the globe. The U.S. has a set of issues involving mass migration. Europeans have it as well. And, part of the challenge is you do have to evaluate the regime of asylum in terms of the practical reality that when you're dealing with literally tens or hundreds of thousands of people, it's hard to conceptualize an immigration policy as based on asylum. And there are huge issues in terms of integrating new people into the country and the culture of Europe and how that may be affected by a large migration of people. So I don't know enough about European law to know specifically what President Sarkozy was talking about. But I do think that there's increasing discussion around the globe to come up with a framework for evaluating how you deal with mass migration in a world where huge numbers of people may be moving around because of war, famine, or things of that sort.